Welcome to this short presentation regarding empirical methods. In our last session we were talking about control variables in order to avoid endogeneity issues due to omitted variable bias. So we were controlling then for education in our relationship between institutions and GDP per capita. There is another empirical issue which we usually need to take account of. Look at this relationship again. I pretend that property rights controlling for other factors, education, health, etc., controlling for everything else, has an effect on GDP per capita. But what could also be, of course, the case is that GDP per capita is actually influencing institutions. So it could be that causality runs from property rights to GDP, so to L and GDP per capita, but it could also be reverse causality, such that the relationship is actually running from GDP per capita to property rights. Okay? If I have this issue, and that could be of course the case, then I would get the same coefficient estimator or similar coefficient estimator. I would get a positive correlation between the two variables, but the interpretation would be totally different. I could not say that property rights are causing higher GDP, but it's rather that higher GDP is causing better property rights. So there are numerous methods in econometrics where we try to solve that problem and try to find evidence of real causal mechanisms. One typical one for that is so-called instrumental variables. Okay? This is NIV approach. Another approach would be regression discontinuity approach. There it's more actually to take account also of omitted variable bias. I want to briefly explain the idea behind the IV approach. The idea behind the IV approach is that I try to find a so-called instrument, an instrumental variable for property rights, where I can credibly say that this instrument has no direct effect on L and GDP per capita. What was proposed in the literature by the Nobel Prize laureates is that I could use settler mortality to explain property rights. The argument here is that settlers, when they were settling in colonies, have brought their institutions. If many settlers died due to health, bad health, the disease environment, etc., then they were rather importing extractive institutions, so not protecting property rights. So if settler mortality influences property rights, higher settler mortality, lower property rights, then what I'm trying to do is that I try to use, put here another flash, that I'm trying to use the part of property rights that is explained by settler mortality to explain GDP per capita. If this is exogenous to property rights, then I have already a relatively good instrument. What I must also assure is that there is no direct link between settler mortality and GDP per capita today. That's a logical argument, or an argument where I need to say that you need to believe that, so that's an assumption in a sense. It's of course a sensible assumption here, so no direct effect. and also no effect via another third variable that I'm not controlling for. This must also be an assumption. If I have this situation, then I can credibly claim that as settler mortality is explaining property rights, and as settler mortality is exogenous, the part of property rights that is being explained by settler mortality is then credibly causal to GDP per capita. So what I'm doing in that situation is, next to the first equation, I'm estimating a second equation. That's why it's sometimes called 2SLS, two-stage least squares estimation, where I explain property rights equals alpha plus beta 1 settler mortality plus the other variables that I have inside. And I use then this part that is explained by settler mortality of property rights and I plug it in here into the original estimation in actually in the literature, in the second stage estimation. Then so here's the first equation, that's the second equation. That's actually the first step that I'm doing, and then this is the second step that I'm doing. And what you will see is that in this specific example, settler mortality and property rights are negatively correlated, quite strongly, and property rights and ln GDP is positively correlated, and the part of property rights explained by SM is also positively correlated with ln GDP per capita. Not that strongly anymore, but also positively correlated. And here, at the end, I can make a credible causal claim that the property rights explained by settler mortality causally affect the GDP per capita. Thank you very much for your attention.